The architects of terror, deception, blood, and the rebranded mechanics of power. In criminal investigations, we are trained to look past the surface noise of history. Standard textbooks want you to believe that tyrants, pirates, and political radicals are larger than life anatomies. But when you audit the metadata of power, you find a reoccurring mathematical history never changes. It simply rebrands its tactics, whether it is an 18th century pirate ship, a European revolution, a divided American republic, or a 20th century military dictatorship. The criminal blueprint is identical. It requires the systematic implementation of media, the weaponization of fear, and the absolute seizure of wealth. As an investigator and a historian, I look directly at the missing gaps. The evidence the scribes tried to alter or hide. Today we are opening the master file on 4 completely different eras to expose the hidden mechanics of terror. We are auditing the crime scenes of the world's most dangerous investigators to reveal how the path of least resistance always leads to absolute control. Idi Amin. The exclusion sequence and the liquidation of an empire. Case file 0.01. Idi Amin, the asset extraction. Let us begin our audit in 1972 inside the East African nation of Uganda. Director Idi Amin walks into the media spotlight. To the international press, he presents a baseline of eccentric, unpredictable behavior. He goads foreign leaders, smiles for the cameras, and styles himself with grand fabricated military titles. But in criminal behavior profiling, we know that extreme eccentricity is often used as a tactical shield, a calculated psychological deflection to mask cold, lethal focus. Looking directly at the financial timeline that modern historians gloss over, in August of 1972, Amin issues a sudden state decree. All citizens of Asia and South Asia descent, predominantly a highly successful community of over 50,000 merchants and business operators, were given exactly 90 days to pack one suitcase and flee the country. Mainstream writers call this a burst of radical nationalism, but as a forensic analyst, I call it what it truly is, or was, a high-level state-sponsored corporate asset liquidation. Amin didn't just expel the people, he seized their entire infrastructure, over 50,000 or 500,000, over 500,000 businesses, massive liquid cash reserves, farms, and millions of dollars in modern real estates were violently confiscated by the state oversight. Behind the public facade of an erratic ruler lay an institutional homicide machine that quietly eliminated over 300,000 political rivals, proving that the ultimate native of tyranny is always financial and operational control. Blackbeard, the geometry of psychological warfare. We move back across the timeline to the early 1700s, deep into the golden age of piracy. The name Edward Edmund Ruffin teaches Blackbeard, evokes images of mindless, chaotic violence, but when you audit the physical signatures of his maritime crime scenes, You realize Blackbeard was a brilliant psychological tactician who mastered the art of deception, detection, and behavioral staying long before the modern sciences were born. Blackbeard didn't want to engage in bloody, prolonged naval battles that would damage the merchant ships he wanted to rob, sink his own vessel, or ruin the valuable cargo he needed to sell. Instead, he staged his entire profile to eliminate his target's will to fight before a single cannon was ever fired. Look at the crime scene construction. He deliberately moved slow-burning hemp cords soaked in salt pepper into his massive blackboard, lighted them just before stepping into view. As he boarded the targeted ship, he was cloaked into a thick, sulphurous cloud of black smoke, looking like a demonic force rising from the hull. He strapped 3 pairs of loaded pistols across his chest in custom leather holsters. This was advanced behavioral manipulation. He forced merchants, captains into an immediate psychological trap. Surrender your resources peacefully, or face total annihilation. The man proves his genius over his entire career. Blackbeard rarely ever killed a captive because his stage... let me re-say that again. The man proves his genius over his entire career. Blackbeard rarely ever killed a captive because his staged theoretical terror forced his victims to choose submission as their only logical survival tool or way out. Thomas Jefferson, the shadow advocate of the Reign of Terror. Now let us pivot to an elite political mystery right at the foundation of the American Republic. Mainstream textbooks paints Thomas Jefferson as a peaceful philosopher of liberty. But an investigator, I look beyond the polished monuments and audit the raw intelligence in his private communications from the 1970s. You see, when you examine the evidence, you uncover a dark, missing gap. Thomas Jefferson's active defense of one of the bloodiest political massacres in human history, the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror. In 1973, inside the streets of Paris, Maximilien Robespierre and the radical Jefferson seized control of the French state. They launched a systematic liquidation of anyone deemed an enemy of the revolution, while other American leaders watched in absolute horror. Recognizing that a cold military coup was masquerading as freedom, Jefferson was serving as the United States Secretary of State at this time. And what did his private leaders reveal? In an infamous, chilling letter to his secretary, William Short, Jefferson defended the mass slaughter. He explicitly wrote that he would rather see half the earth desolated than see the revolution fail. Again, let me repeat Thomas Jefferson's words. He wrote that he would rather see half the earth desolated rather than see the revolution fail. He openly argued that the violent elimination of an entire ruling class was an ideological movement. While Jefferson's eventual presidency was bloodless, his willingness to justify mass slaughter to protect a political narrative is a textbook study in how elite scribes hide their darkest ideological allegiances behind a rebranded mask of peace. Edmund Ruffin, the operational spark of the American Civil War. Again, Edmund Ruffin, the operational spark of the American Civil War. Okay, so our final case file brings us to the absolute flashpoint of the bloodiest conflict in American history, the United States Civil War. For generations, we have been told a generalized narrative that the war started as an abstract, inedible clash of regions. But when an investigator audits a catastrophic, systematic failure, we look for the single operational instigator who pulled the trigger to ensure a peaceful solution was physically impossible. That man was a radical, fanatical Virginian named Edmund Ruffin. Ruffin was a prominent agricultural chemist and extreme fire eater, the historical term for wealthy Southern secessionists who spent decades using media psychology and fear-making pamphlets to warp public thinking and stroke his decades of psychological manipulation to reach their tactical climax. Confederate forces surrounded Fort Sumter, a federal military base in South Carolina. Because of Ruffman's fanatical devotion to breaking the Union, the military leaders, gave the 67-year-old civilian the ultimate symbolic honor. They allowed Edmund Ruffin to physically pull the lanyard on the Columbian cannon that fired the very first shot of the Civil War. The war that Ruffin sparked went on to claim over 600,000 American lives. But look at the final dark criminal conclusion to his file, or to his legacy, or to his life. In April of 1865, completely consumed by his own ideological rage, refusing to live under a rebranded United States of America government, that is, Ruffin wrapped himself in a Confederate flag, wrote a final diary entry cursing the United States. And eventually, he pulled the trigger and he killed himself.